Hey, I'm lurppis. I played Counter-Strike for a living for 8 years. I've been on the desk for some of the biggest events for 5 years. I know nothing about Counter-Strike, but then again, neither does Thorin. Welcome to his YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of the Know-It-Alls of Counter-Strike. Me and Tommy here are back. For this episode, we're going to go a bit off the wall. We're going to take some topical stuff, but we're going to take, I think, an abstract look at it. So, first things first, everyone just watched IEM Katowice, and obviously all the narratives coming out of it, obviously not all the fake ones coming out of ESL about, oh, look at this trophy. Dude, I almost wanted to clown on fucking Ulrich when he was trying to talk about the trophy that Virtus.pro won, which by the way they won EMS won. Don't pretend to me that your brands can just be interchanged. That's like saying I worked at fucking Pepsi. You actually working one of their different sub. You worked at Mountain Dew or something. I don't know who the fuck they own, but listen, the brands exist for a reason. And me and lurppis were there when you were literally saying in interviews I don't think CS:GO is really cut out for IEM, so I'm not going to let you claim IEM years later. And even Carmack at least had the good fucking decency to put a 4-year gap between EMS and IEMs of 2012 to 2016. He didn't pretend it existed.
Remember, the same thing actually happened going back to 1.6. The very first event wasn't really an IEM, and then after the fact, it got branded as IEM. The first
yes, you're right.
event that was at
yes.
CBIT.
It was just ESL Masters, I think, at the time. Yeah. Yeah, by the way, you also cannot manipulate the time stream and insert a sponsor back in history if he didn't sponsor the product. That just goes without saying at this point. I don't know why it has to, lurppis. I know facts can be stubborn things, but time is one thing we can't actually affect right now, boys, in esports.
Well, if we can, let me know. I'll probably use it for something else other than inserting Intel in an event name and probably come up with more lucrative uses of time.
I tell you what, though, listen, that would be a straight fire way to be able to pitch to sponsors. I'll pitch them that fucking Fnatic team from 2009. The straight fire, look, they're winning all the events and everything. Listen, the results are in the book. This is going to be easy, mate. I think we could get a few mil raised from some moron who doesn't understand how the time stream works. Maybe get someone who's the ones who are in some sort of hippie shit on the side, they're contacting their ancestors or whatever. Maybe we can get them in on we found some quantum way to send good vibes back through time or whatever, we can maybe get them. So anyway, what I was going to say was, obviously the dominant narratives from this tournament was CIS region, oh my god, every single one of these CIS teams is actually top 10, and in fact the CIS has taken over, haha, it's the best region. And so where are we going on this, or where are we going to start off here? Because I'll just say straight, first of all, I don't hate new talent, but I hate people who elevate new talent to a level they have not reached yet. And then this is one of those few areas, by the way, where I've noticed a real difference between active pros and former pros. If you ever watch me do one of those old school reflections with a retired pro who's been retired 10 years, the reason they are so nice to me and polite in a way that the active pros never are is because, dude, they actually finally get it that if you're retired and you played 10, 15 years ago, almost no one who brings your name up, if they ever bring your name up, actually watched you play. So if someone was to go back and go, oh, Wimp, yeah, he was a pretty good player, but let's be real, Carrigan was as good. It's bullshit. I watched them play. I was there. So you know what? In that scenario, if you're Wimp, it's I'm glad someone like Thorin's here who's actually going to fucking take the bullshit narrative aside. So everyone will, it's that thing where everyone who played 1.6 is a legend. There's no point having the word legend if they're all legends, are they? Until there's 5 legends in every team, so it doesn't work. So basically, some of these teams can't be legit. Definitely they can't be this good. And then thirdly, just to hurt everyone's feelings, they wouldn't do this if it was on LAN. Now, not all of them. I think some of them might be interesting. I think some of them have some potential. And definitely some of the players are very good. But come on, where are we starting on the CIS topic?
So I think actually I would like to start on something that you kind of alluded to but didn't necessarily say, which is that it's all relative. And I think the bigger change here is, and by the way, I fully agree. I think some of these players and teams are going to be very good. I have no doubt that some of these players on Gambit and Virtus.pro would, for example, be very good on Navi, make a real difference there if they were picked up, and probably are going to be stars for years to come. I do agree. I don't like when players and teams get hyped up too soon, simply because that kind of takes away from the achievement for those players who actually earn it. But I mean, just looking at the results now, it could be that everybody's kind of just grown to the same level. There's huge parity in the scene. If you look at the world rankings, not to say that those are a perfect proxy of where everybody is, but just looking at the results, it just seems like just about anybody in the top 20 can beat anybody. currently. There's just very little differentiation. There's like a small upper tier maybe among some of them who tend to do better, but it's just a lot of randomness in the results as far as I'm concerned. And I do feel like we'll have no way of quantifying it, and like we won't really even know whether it was true or not even after the fact, but certainly not before things return to regular offline play. But it's just really hard to tell how big of a difference playing online is making on, teams like G2, who did not do particularly well. Certainly, if I have to put Nico against the Gambit guys offline, Kenny S against the Gambit guys, I'm gonna assume that match offline benefits G2 relative to online. It doesn't mean G2 wins offline. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with Gambit or they're necessarily better. It's just that I think all else equal, G2 is probably going to be better offline relative to online. And we saw similar results with Heroic last year. Again, not to say Heroic is online. I think there's some other teams who probably can get more motivated for big offline tournaments, playing in front of big crowds, whatever. They'll put in more work. I think when you play for months and months from home, in online tournaments, it all kind of starts blending together. And I could imagine, just based on past experiences, that at some point it becomes hard for you to sort of stay motivated and keep treating every one of these tournaments that from your perspective feel exactly the same. You're sitting at your desk at home and you're playing exactly the same way in the same exact surroundings. And there's like a couple different numbers on a website that dictate how much prize money you stand to win. But really, it's really the same, that it becomes hard for you to kind of treat them differently. And I think that's the fundamental reason why you get these results. We talked about this months ago, that the longer you play online, the more kind of random to some extent the results become, if only at least in terms of rankings, in the sense that you get some extra randomness added to the system. And then, once you roll that forward by a couple of months, that randomness compounds and it goes on and on and on. And eventually you get things that just kind of are further and further from what would have been the equilibrium otherwise. So that's kind of my stance. I don't think it's necessarily any one thing. I just think the sort of the whole ecosystem functions differently without offline play.
Right, here's the thing. One of the reasons why I think this has been like hard for people to spot is, I know it sounds like a mad side angle, but I believe it's real. I actually think Simple and ZywOo have masked the fact that online and offline play is different. Because think about how many stars that you're proven material on LAN didn't have that good a period, especially early on when we went online, or had a bad summer or something. Obviously, Kenny S is an obvious example. He was in great form again before they went online. Like, in this scenario, right, the problem is, because ZywOo and Simple are just fucking gods at the game, they carry no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's online, offline. They could probably carry if we just chucked them in a fucking random game. Like, I don't think people get it. Like, this is one of the thing that actually was gross to me about this last weekend as well. Every fucker that's a CIS player now is the next Simple, right? Listen, motherfucker, I don't think you know what greatness is if you think there's next Simple. Like, motherfucker, the fact that we got one Simple, like, that doesn't have to happen. That doesn't have to happen whatsoever. Like, we could have had a game that was exactly the same with very similar teams, there would never be a Simple. Same with ZywOo. I'll put him in that category. There's not many players that are in that category, but once you are, like, you should almost have like a reverence for that name before you invoke it in that way. Like, everyone knows, like, from sports, like, as soon as you start saying like next Michael Jordan, like, they almost never make it, mate. That's why it's mad that actually Kobe even came that close. Like, no one should even be able to come vaguely close to, like, these are outliers in history. So then the other angle is this, right? So one thing that I really hated about all that approach of like the fucking, but how could you not know that they'll be not that good offline? Listen, motherfucker, don't make it sound like I'm the one who has to prove my case. I'll just take all of history and all the actual pros that achieved it online and can tell you what it's like, and I can look with my eyes. You're speculating that maybe this team would be as good online, because I'll tell you a very quick anecdote. If I say the name Heaton, everyone, even if they've never watched him play, know Heaton is a fucking legend of the game, or they like fucking Mount Rushmore. Like, at one point he was the face of CS, basically. I once heard a story, just to put in context, that everyone has their first LANs, right? In 2001, not the one at the end when they were in NIP and they won the World Championship, but before in the summer, they actually had broken the NIP team up, right? And they had they sort of went and formed two teams. And one was with Veslin, and he was with like Heaton and a few others, and Medion. And then the other one was Potty and a bunch of those guys. It was actually in that All-Stars team before they became Finnish. And they basically split into two teams. And because they just met in the final and played each other, that's why they put the team back together. They were like, wait a minute, we're just all the best. Like, why are we in separate teams when we could join together and dominate? Which, by the way, they did. But this is the story. When they played this LAN, it was the CPL that was in Holland. Because it was Heaton's first big LAN, right? Even though this is very early in the game of lands, etc., Veslin even told me, like, one of the reasons why when everyone called, like, Heaton a god the next few years, Veslin always used to be like, really? Is because he even said, dude, I remember looking over and just seeing Heaton's hand just shaking like a motherfucker when it was, like, the match on land, like, oh, my God, because you never know until that moment. I always tell people this. You might be the coolest customer in Clod Shears. You might be a cool guy in real life. Nobody knows, because it's like being thrown into water when you've never swum. Like, sink or swim, baby. You might be amazing. You might be like one of those babies that can just swim instantly. Or you know what? You might just fucking drown. You might just drown on stage. That's a real thing. Yep. So, like, I'm sorry. I don't believe. I know now it's not even controversial, but I didn't believe back then that Heroic, with like the fucking third best player on about 7 DreamHack Open winners, I don't believe that they were going to be the number 1 team in the world online. I know that's crazy, and it turned out their coach was only fucking cheating one, and then they fell off the cliff. That's weird, isn't it? It's weird how these, life's a funny business, isn't it? The coincidences. Anyway, then we'll go to the other point, which is about all the rankings that you're saying, right? Here's the thing. Sometimes, especially because of how names work, like I'll give you an example. I personally think the name FaZe has trapped analysts and people on the internet a million times for the last 2 years. Because since in your brain, FaZe has to be a top team, if you even see a group drawn, it's like FaZe, Astralis, G2, you're like, oh my God, it's the group of death. It's like, actually, that might be totally appropriate if we go and look at the seedings. Like, one area I think people are really stupid is, be very careful about calling ESL out on their seedings, because the last few years, they've been killing it. Like, they're actually doing a very good job. They tend to go off world rankings. Like, they're not hacking it like they used to back in the days where, they want Cloud9 to make the play. They're not doing any of that shit anymore, guys. But here's one thing, right? I test be damned. If I open up hltv.org right now, lurppis, and I go down, just going down here, 26th best team in the world is Nemiga from Belarus, right? I stop right there. I press the X in the little corner of the thing, and I don't need to watch anymore. Like, I don't know. And by the way, this is where an idiot's going to go at this, Lurppis. Yeah, but they are 26 because of their placings in these. That's what we're saying. That's what we're saying. That's the point. The way the system's done at the moment, because everyone can't all meet together, and they can't all meet together online, and all the regions can't play. By the way, the region splitters fucked those rankings so hard, it's unreal. So hard. That's why if you're an NA team, you can be 200th and you win like 5 games. That's an exaggeration, obviously, but like, it's like he jumps 80 spots and then I was like, what is this ranking system, guys? Like, this is nonsense. Like, I can't just win one match in tennis and just go like, whee! It's like, oh, all right, Federer, I'm behind you now, mate. Like, what is this? Like, as you say, the problem is this. Because online is this mysterious black box, that's what it was like, I guess the results are real. You're taking an I guess and building an assumption on that, and then you're inviting people to the next I guess tournament off the assumption, which then produces some fucked results, which then Heroic beats Astralis, and the system goes. Remember, I've always said this about rankings, it's the most on-point aspect. A computer cannot make the human qualitative judgment. He can only go off his rules. So if the computer sees, Heroic beat Astralis, he goes, Heroic's better than Astralis then. Like, he cannot go, yeah, but in a month, like, so the problem is, like, these rankings now, dude, we're in the twilight zone. Like, some of them are correct because some teams, they're like the team equivalent of Ziwu and Simple. Like, they can do it. Like, Na'Vi, Vitality, yeah, these teams can do it. But I'm with you, mate. Even these teams can lose, as you've seen, to almost anyone on the right day. And sometimes that was impossible on LAN. Like, the teams that would always place top 8, top 4, like, that doesn't almost even exist now.
No, I think it really doesn't. I mean, just that I open up the world rankings when you mention it, and like, these are teams that are outside of top 9 currently. G2, Complexity, EG, Mouse Sports, Fnatic, OG, FaZe. None of those teams are in there. Meanwhile, we've got, and again, nothing against these teams specifically, but we got VP at 3rd, we got Gambit at 4th, we've got Spirit at 8th, and I suppose Big has actually kind of fallen off now. They're 7th. But it's just a lot of teams who have not really gotten the big offline wins. I mean, the VP core really has just made their comeback now since the Star Ladder Major.
I mean, mate.
Or I guess the Moscow Blast event right after, which I think was the sort of the end of that peak.
Even though, obviously, listen, I'll give Gambit their props for winning IEM Katowice. Look who they fucking beat to win it. They have to get props for that. But let's be real. I do my own rankings, and I do it based on feel and what makes sense, and I evaluate, and I look at, like, what does this tournament compare to a 4th at this one, to a 2nd at this one? Right, if you click ranking detail for Gambit, who, by the way, are now ranked 4th in the world, here's what they have. Yeah, they won IEM Katowice. Then they played and didn't even make the finals of 3 DreamHacks. One was a Masters. That one's legit. That was the top 8. The others were semis at like DreamHack Opens. Then they had CIS tournaments, which they didn't even place top 5. I don't know how you're calculating it, but me and you had like a rankings meeting recently where we were consulting with people and trying to figure it out. Essentially, you can't use the circular logic of, well, I programmed the machine this way and it spit out these results. Therefore, well, the machine did that. It's like, no, you did that indirectly. So if at the end it spits out a result like Gambit is 4th best in the world, I think we need to have a look at that. We need to look into what went on. Because if I look below 4th, right, well, number 6 is Team Liquid, who was in the final of the Blast fucking global, the IEM Global Challenge or whatever, and they just made top 4 at this IEM. Like, listen, making a bunch of DreamHack Open like 3rd to 4th wouldn't put you above that probably in my ranking. Like, I'll have to go and do my ranking soon to see where this would be, but like, something's a bit off with this. I'm not saying use the eye test to do rankings, of course not, but like, something's askew. Like, I don't know how we can fix it though, because the problem is, here's the issue, right? Especially because Na'Vi exists. You can't just say, sorry, CIS region, you can just never have any ranking points whatsoever, because sometimes Na'Vi is trapped there, like if it's an IEM. So you have to give them some points, but then the problem is, how many points do we give you? Because if you can just dominate a small region, Renegades is the obvious example, like, actually, I don't care how many of those tournaments you win, because if the second best team is so shit, I sort of do give you in my mind 0 points. And I know it's fucked, but that's why as a human, I'm not a computer, mate. I can just change my mind. So I don't know how we get out of this. Like, do you have an idea? Like for example, do we move to an ELO system or something? Like, what are even potential solutions? Are there any?
Well, I mean, I think ELO system is how you'd have to do it, but again, I think that actually amplifies the current issues in online
True.
play.
I guess they would be upsetting,
Because then you're going off of every individual upset. By the way, here's another thing that I don't know how is currently being factored in the HLTV ranking. Could probably find out reasonably easily, but Vitality has 6 players. How are they getting their points adjusted? Astralis on paper, in theory, has 6 players. I guess for Katowice they had 7.
Yes.
Not that Bubsky has really played too much, but like this is like another factor that you somehow have to factor in. It's not necessarily clear to me how you would do it.
We should tie that to the other point, which is how ESL does it. ESLs is mental. If people don't know, ESLs, like HLT, you carry a percentage of the points or whatever. But ESL did probably the maddest one I've ever seen, which is you can just take those points with you. So as you pointed out when they first announced it, if someone had just made a team the next day where Guardian, who at the time was a washed up bomb and no one wanted, if he'd have joined like one of these teams, they would have like instantly been like 24th in the world or something mental because he had all Na'Vi's points, right? Listen, I agree. The weird thing about esports compared to sports is in esports, like the fucking box now, it's like if they just said, actually, we're just leaving Tampa Bay entirely as a team and we're just joining another franchise. Now, that is mad. But the problem here is you can't be doing it the other way of like, right, so if you took Tom Brady and then you took like, I don't know, fucking Travis Kelce, you had them, and then suddenly they're the number 1 ranked. Like, how would that make sense? The team has never played a game. Listen, how can you rank a team that has never played a game of Counter-Strike together? Please, if anyone's watching, I'm just appealing to sanity. Just sanity, for God's sake.
Well, I think that the reason that people, in many ways, I think about this wrong, and like nobody's really kind of yet figured out, I think, how to really make sense of all the, well, I mean, first of all, like all the publicly available stats are just frankly bad and largely useless. Like you can highlight some of the obvious stuff, like how great Simple and Zaiwu are, for example, but beyond that, like you just lack a lot of the context. But the reason that I think a lot of the people have gotten into stats and then rely on them too much is because of Moneyball, right? But the difference is that baseball, you actually can model perfectly because it's actually a one-on-one game, just masking itself as a team game because of a team component. But everything individually, you actually can model really well one at a time. And that's one sport without the kind of interplay of the players on the field in a similar way at the same time. And that's why, that became the poster boy for all things analytics. And, smart people have figured out ways to kind of make more use of that. So, NBA is a good example with 3-point shooting and some of the other things that people are looking at. I think for, like, frankly, just the stuff that, to my knowledge, people generally look at in Counter-Strike, the stuff that's available, that people are interested in, etc., just like means almost nothing for the most part.
Because the other option is the one that no one wants. But I'm not joking. I used to suggest it for fun and for my own selfish reasons, but I actually think, I'm not joking, this would actually really help Counter-Strike right now. Because listen, anyone who saw those viewing figures for that final, dude, that was depressing. I'm not hating on the teams. The teams have got to get theirs and they do what they do, and obviously in the future their fans will come. But the idea that the final was like lower than like 1 billion of the other fucking IEM finals before because it was two teams of CIS that no one cared about, and it wasn't Na'Vi, unfortunately, who were the ones who bring the CIS fans. Like, here's the problem, right? The only way you can solve that, it's evil. I have to not invite Gambit to the tournament. So what I'm saying essentially is you have to have Dana White. Now, I obviously suggested in the past, just make it me, mate. Like, I was even going to do this for Flashpoint when we were going to do some, like, invites. I even said, like, mate, I said to Monty, if you give me the power to do the invites, you are aware, like, unless VP, like, is just, like, hard, like, top 8, I'll just not invite him and invite someone I prefer, like, Fnatic, who I like their style, and they have the players, you know, like, I'll just do it, mate, because at the end of the day, right now, especially during coronavirus, mate, we're not trying to only build a sport with integrity. There's plenty of tournaments doing that. We need a sport that's entertainment. This is an entertainment project. And so if people don't know, listen, Dana White has done some very unfair things. I can remember back in the day when George St. Pierre was the champion, and the second best fighter in the division at the time was a guy called John Fitch, and his problem was his style was also grind out wrestling, right? And he'd already fought GSP and lost in a boring ass wrestling match. So even though he won maybe like 6 fights in a row against like contenders and stuff, he was just never going to be allowed another title shot if GSP was the champion, because Dana White's logic was like, listen, mate, unless you do something mental like win 20 fights in a row, like, this isn't a money fight. Like, I'm here to make money. I'm not here to just put on cool fucking fights, am I? So, as a result, Dana White, listen, he'll never fully admit it. He'll give up some other reason. You know, he's not marketable or so. He'll have some angle, you know. But, like, in the end of the day, he makes the money fights. And in Counter-Strike, we need those. We really do. Like, I made this point before. I made it as, like, an obscure point. But I think more than ever, this should have been E-League's focus from the beginning. You know when they did that Clash for Cash? Dude, that should have been E-League's whole thing. Since all they had was that time slot on a Friday for like an hour or something. It should have only been high-level show matches between whoever the 2 best teams were at the time, and then just give them like 250k for whoever wins it, winner takes all. That would be incredible. Imagine the content you could create around that. Also, because it's 1 and 2 playing in a big money match, 1 and 2 don't always meet in the final. Sometimes 1 and 2 don't even fucking play for like 4 months. You know, they just, like, remember how many times Na'Vi was the team that could have beaten Astralis, but they could never play them because Team Liquid beat them and then lost to Astralis. Like, in that scenario, fuck it. Let's have a Na'Vi versus Astralis game. In fact, you know what? There's even modifiers you can do to make it incredible. Like, what if you made it so it's like Na'Vi Astralis? I'm doing the old one here. And then it's like, right, we just don't even have Nuke in the pool for it. There we go, let's have some fun. Instead of having Na'Vi having to auto-ban or lose Nuke, maybe I just tell you the maps you're playing. And you know what? I can make it fair. Like, if I make it, like, sorry, Astralis, I've taken something away. So if you win, you get a multiplier. If Na'Vi wins, they just get the... Like, dude, there's a million angles to this. There's so much creativity we could come up with it. Just because the idea is, since already, spoiler, the second we go on LAN, a massive asterisk appears next to all these results and nobody will give a fuck. Why not make it fun? You know,
the other thing that I've pointed out a million times and people are very unhappy about whenever I say that is just, it's just not interesting to watch like a pretty big favorite against another team in a best of 3 in a group stage. Like, it's just, I'm sorry, like the better team will win more often than not when it's a best of 3 as compared to best of 1. It's just not interesting. I'm not really that interested in watching it. However, if you made that a best of 1, I'm probably tuning in for all of them. You know, I might check out halfway through if the big favorite is winning a lot, but if they start down 1-5, I'm all of a sudden interested. I'm not interested in the best of 3 scenario many times because I just think they're going to pull through anyway. So I think that's another scenario where all else equal, I would rather play more, particularly now that things are online and you can kind of go from match to match really quickly. There's no 30-minute delay for setting up computers, etc. I would much rather just play many more best of 1s than I would fewer best of 3s, even if the broadcast hours are the same, which is what the tournament organizers really care about. And I do think that actually gets you more viewership because it's more of a do or die. Every map matters. And we've talked about this a couple of times in the past. If you and I play against each other, a lot of the time I win my map, you win your map, and it comes down to the same third map anyway. A lot of the time, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that I upset you on your map pick and it goes 2-0 and the fans are robbed of a map where both teams have everything on the line. So I just think I understand why everybody wants best of threes as a player. Of course, you want to play best of threes,
course, yeah.
Unless you're the underdog, in which case you prefer best of ones, unless you're not honest with yourself. But I just think the fans should actually be pushing for best of ones, and for the point that you made, which is that it's just more entertaining. And it's ultimately an entertainment product, and the more entertaining you make the product, the more people will tune in to watch, and the more people tune in to watch, the more money there will be in the ecosystem, and the more money there will be in the ecosystem, the better the product will become, because there will be more money to invest in improving the product, which, by the way, has not really changed much in the last couple of years.
No. In fact, there's another area that I find it's like, here's the thing, right? When you're in a scenario like this, everyone knows that like classic saying, like, fucking necessity is the mother of invention. It's when your like parameters are limited that you have to get really creative within those boundaries. You have to do something genius. It's the basic reason, if people don't know, why all these Hollywood movies where they can CGI anything in are fucking shit. But like movies from the 80s where you can see it's just like a guy in a fucking monster costume are like incredibly compelling, because guess what? You're going to have to be an amazing cinematographer to light that guy, to show me the right angles, not show him for too long, but show me in long enough that I see the monster, but not quite. You're going to actually have to be a genius to make me believe that that's it. But if you can, think about like Alien, mate. That wouldn't hold up if you tried to like freeze framing and examining it, but it's fucking straight fire, the atmosphere. So here's the problem I have, right? Is when you're doing all these things in this scenario, like, why isn't there not a format or a tournament? And I know everyone's going to go, what about Flashpoint? By the way, spoiler, dickheads. I never got to do a single Flashpoint tournament that was the format I came up with or came even close due to coronavirus and other limitations. Like, I never got to do one. I was always hamstrung working on like 4 compromises deep on the original premise. So one thing I would say is this: how has 1TO not thought to make their broadcast the one that's like got massive breathing room for like extra content and like interviews, and then like you can build like storylines around a team for the next day? They're still all doing that thing, Lurppis, where because they only care about hours viewed, they just ram the stream full of as many games in a row as possible. And so you go from the most epic game to the very next game. It's like you're just watching it already. Like, that is such a waste of the product. Like, if you could halve the matches, but like double the amount of like focus and make it a super compelling project. And the reason why I can't handle this is I sort of get it if it's DreamHack Open. Dude, if I'm doing Blast Global Finals or IEM Katowice, it's your fucking flagship event. Make it a spectacle. Make it some next level shit. Even online, you could do that.
Well, I mean, so one of the things that we wanted to do with the original Flashpoint, but we had scheduled, but we couldn't because of coronavirus, was having a bunch of breaks from when the regular season ends to when playoffs start,
Yes.
and then again between some of the final games, so that you can actually do content. So
Yes.
you would not only would you not play 2 games on the final day, but you would actually have a break between the semifinals and the finals. You have a couple days off,
Yes.
such that teams could spend more time preparing. You could do more content around it. I tweeted this out last week, but like around this time last week, I actually started wondering if Katowice somehow ended and I just missed it, because it had been like 3 days with no mention of it anywhere. I had seen no content. Nobody's even talking about it, and it just kind of like died a slow death in the background. From that context, it's actually surprising that the previous game before the grand final even got the viewership that they did. And for the record, nobody today is willing to take the chance that having fewer broadcast hours leads to fewer total hours watched at a similar, roughly similar cost base. But I actually do believe that to the extent that someone like ESL, who controls, 70% plus of the calendar, 70% of the total viewed
Yes.
hours, something like that, of large Counter-Strike tournaments, if you're in that position, I do think if you consolidated some of that and made it higher quality, even if it's shorter, you could accomplish 2 things. One, I think you would get higher viewership for the key matches, and 2, I actually think there would be interest in some of the other content that you, by the way, can produce for cheaper, and you can get people to watch that too. It's when you flood everybody's day, and like I wake up, the Katowice game started, California time started at 6 a.m. and then I think 9 a.m. was the second round of games. But it's a best of 3. It's like a 30-minute break, and it's another best of 3. You can't really do anything about that. On the other hand, what if you scheduled it 1 best of 3 a day? You just made it prime time, so basically
Yes.
everybody could watch it. You had like, call it like an hour of content going leading up to it, similar to what the NBA does before big games. You did the next semifinal the next day. You gave, in this scenario, you probably would have to as ESL, you'd probably have to hire somebody to do the content for you, given that nobody's currently doing it in the industry. But I do think you could do a pretty good job of building compelling narratives.
Yes.
By the way, I also do believe that like I would find it much more interesting to watch, for example, the VP Gambit Grand Final if somebody had kind of laid out a bunch of the stuff behind it for me in an easy to digest format. Like it's not for no reason that ESPN puts out those stories, like before Golden State plays, like they rerun the story of like how Curry practices his shot and like bunch of stuff around it. They rerun some of the stories about like, before the Bucks games of like how Giannis came to the NBA and how he developed over the last couple of years. Like it's not for no reason. Like they do that on purpose because you get invested into the game after you read that stuff. And like nobody is just doing it. Just
imagine
nobody.
basically
they're just like you're just yelling into the void.
Imagine tying those two concepts together. So maybe I'll go with the extreme. Let's make it like the NFL, where if you win the fucking conference final, obviously it's 2 weeks before the Super Bowl. We're not going that ridiculous, right? But in this case, imagine if after the brackets decided and only the finals left, there was 2 days, and in that 2 days, listen, we're not saying make like a full fucking documentary, but they made a piece that was about like Shiro, like this is who he is, and in it they also are able to get like Simple to be like, yeah, I've seen him in practices, or some guys like, yeah, actually you went to watch out for these guys 6 months ago when they were Gambit youngsters. Like, again, the casual fan who only turned up to watch FaZe Clan and Team Liquid and Na'Vi, the big names that he knows, now he might actually watch that and be like, maybe there is something to this. Like, maybe there's a reason to root for this underdog team. Whereas, as I say, like, basically, unless you're a hardcore fan, you just watched that tournament and you were like, oh, that was in the final. Nah, I don't think I'll bother watching. I bet that, literally, that must have been what happened if you look at the numbers. People just didn't tune in.
You can even do much, and just to like take it back a notch, like you can even do much simpler stuff. Like imagine you just pay somebody like 1K to create like a frag movie highlighting Gambit's route to the grand final, and you put that out, like, or like the playoffs leading up to the final days that were played in the final weekend. If you're obviously the majority of the fans are going to be in Europe and Eastern Europe, but there's a bunch of fans in North America as well. For example, these games start at 3 a.m. every day, so unless the teams just happen to be in the final match slots of the day, which a lot of the time, like Gambit basically never was, you're just not going to have seen them play whatsoever. It's hard to get invested in that towards the end.
Also, like, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Put it this way. I've just realised, how have I never made this connection on Twitter before? Because obviously another thing I hate is the notion that, like, isn't it brilliant when a fucking underdog upsets everyone? Whereas I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like, no, I hate that. You know how I am. I wanted to be at number 1 and number 2 in the final every time and just, keep that story going. All I'll say is this. The logic, the prevailing consensus among the scene is, it's brilliant. We all love underdogs. Everyone loves an underdog story. Then logically the final should have the highest viewership ever. What that means is, like, 400 of you mentalists fucking like underdogs, you all watched, and then everyone else was like, what, there's nobody in the final? I know, I'm out, I'm just going to go watch fucking Netflix or something. Like,
well, look,
the numbers don't lie.
Those final 5 minutes of the game where the underdog beat the big name were very exciting, and then all the excitement was gone right after, never to return once the big favorite was knocked out of the tournament.
And in fact, I just went and looked now because I thought, what's a classic example? Well, obviously, when the last major final, when Vanguard shockingly made the final, which are VP now, but let's be real, they don't have your Kinder, so it was a much different team, right? The problem is because they overperformed to get there. Mate, I've looked it up now. The viewership of that, the peak viewership of that event was like 837,000 for the whole event. Like, I'll see if I can find the final, like what that was. But I'm going to guess there's no way the final had the highest viewership. Let me have a quick look here. Oh, it did actually, but it barely had higher viewership than Na'Vi versus NRG in the quarterfinals. It had like less than 100k more. In the motherfucking major final, when the storyline is Astralis is going for 3 in a row and 4 overall. If that isn't watched, that's because people don't want the team on the other side of the server. Dude, if you have history like that, like, I don't care what the outcome would have been of the Super Bowl. I'll guarantee everyone was going to watch for fucking Tom Brady and fucking Patrick Mahomes. They know that's history in the making. People are here, if anything, were like, it is history in the making, but I don't need to watch it. I'm sure Astralis wins anyway. And by the way, I watched that game. You didn't miss anything. I'm sorry to report. It was garbage.
Well, on the other hand, at least you didn't waste much time because that thing was over in like 35 rounds, if I recall correctly.
Oh, and I'll also say every other game at that was high viewed was like Na'Vi, NRG, Astralis, Liquid, G2. I noticed the Vanguard's only in there for the final. When they're beating Vitality and Ready, no one gives a shit, man. No one's watching that game. These are hard facts. People don't get it. Because the reason why this matters, right, as well, is we're not like sports, right? Sports can afford, for the historical value, for an underdog to make a crazy run and make it to the final. Like, obviously, that happened with the fucking Heat recently. Like, that never should happen, but that was a great story, right? Because here's the thing. They're mega businesses that, I mean, I know they're having hard times now, but still, they're enormous businesses of scale. Right now in esports, it's half the reason we made Flashpoint. Everyone's hemorrhaging money out of the arse. The last thing we can afford is less viewers on the fucking product. Again, I am not blaming Gambit and VP. I'm not even blaming ESL. Like, it's a circumstance we can't avoid, unfortunately. But it's why, like, business as usual ain't going to work, really.
No, I mean, you have to, and also again, like, there's other ways to solve around it, but you should actively look for those solutions. One other thing that we kind of mentioned as something to talk about before that I kind of want to jump to is the whole Valorant situation, which
Sure.
I think obviously largely a North American thing currently, and some of it is I think a function of the fact that currently you can't really play Counter-Strike in North America. You're either one of the top teams and you're effectively living in Europe, which is what Liquid's doing. EG has been, I think, on and off. I think they've returned some of the time, but largely been in Europe, which I think is probably why the part of the reason why Ethan left. And I think you might have been the one who made the point on Twitter, but I think now some of the North Americans are kind of seeing what many of the Europeans have been up against. Obviously, some people do better with the prolonged period away from home than others, but everybody enjoyed making fun of Simple when he didn't exactly enjoy being in the US, having no friends, didn't really speak the language at the time, was kind of just there playing video games all day, and now people have to go to Europe for a couple months and they're complaining on Twitter about the travel, etc. So I suppose two sides. I think we can talk a little bit about the Simple side, which I think is interesting. And then the other piece is just that it's really tough for anybody in the second tier of Counter-Strike to be in North America, which is going to effectively mean that it's unlikely any very interesting or good teams develop in the second tier in America in the coming months, because you just can't really make a living there right now. There's nothing to play. There's no one to practice against. There's no way to improve. Which helps Valorant in the short term, but I actually think will not work out for most of those Counter-Strike players in the long term. And the reason is a lot of the time when a new FPS game comes out, usually the best players in that tend to be some mixture of old Counter-Strike pros, because that just tends to be where most of the talented FPS players are. And they have a pretty big advantage early on because they played similar games. They kind of, they can kind of apply a lot of what they already know and just kind of get ahead of the game and figure out some things early on. But as we've seen with even CS:GO from the beginning, the best players today, by and large, are CS:GO players. They're not CS 1.6 players. They're not CS Source players. They're CS:GO players. And I think particularly for new games that are just more distance from what existed before than just CS:GO from the previous versions, I think it's very unlikely that the best Counter-Strike players who transferred to Valorant are going to be the best Valorant players, or even among the best Valorant players a year from now, much less 2 years from now. So it's a short-term play. I think benefits the people kind of jumping over, and in some ways, I understand trying to make the jump earlier. Well, you still can, but I think that's an interesting situation that I think is developing for North America.
By the way, on the Simple angle, the reason I also reference Simple directly there is because obviously he's the one where no one ever gave a fuck that he was from Ukraine. Think about this, right? I just looked it up now. At the time that Simple went to North America and played in Team Liquid, he was something like fucking 18 years and 3 months old or something mental like that, right? He went, at the time, he didn't have super good English. He had broken English. He went over to America, a country he's never lived in and has no connection to the culture. I know Americans are stupid enough to think that because Simple might watch Transformers 3, that he understands America. He doesn't. That's so stupid, it's unbelievable. Listen, I watched a fucking Jet Li movie. I don't know anything about the culture he's from. So when he went over there, yes, I understand because he's a bit toxic and whatnot. Because he was a little bit toxic, but that can't have been it. I think people also were jealous that, there's big Europeans coming on. Who does he think he is? Every fucking pro just shit on him in ESEA, like trying to make like remember, that's why I went mental on Freakazoid that time when he was like trying to do it. Because I was like, dude, your trash talk is garbage. You told Simple he has bad aim, and then Taco said to him, you would never do that on LAN. It's like, have any of you have looked in the mirror? Listen, I fuck with both of you, but like, listen, I don't want to hear that like James Worthy talked shit on fucking Michael Jordan. Like, yeah, but have you ever won a ring like me, bitch? It's like, I don't really know if you know what winning a ring means, mate. Like, I don't have I don't have Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar next to me. They were like, how are you even going to trash talk me? So imagine the amount of abuse this guy took. And then, by the way, did he break under it like every Europe? Did he do an oboe and go, I can't handle it, I'm going home? Nah, he just went to the major and fucking hard carried him the top 4, almost the final. Then the next major, as a stand-in, just fucked around and took him in the final. Like, how can you even? And then at the end of it, we don't even factor that in. People will even analyze his career, dude. Like, well, 2016 was pretty good. It's like, dude, what was Olaf Meister playing in Brazil for one of his years? Have I missed something? I was like, how are we going to contrast these people? It's why, by the way, even though he's a cunt as a human being, I will always give Nico what I call the guardian factor, which is, motherfucker, he isn't playing for a Balkan team or a Bosnian team, which is his people, his culture, like where he grew up, like players he's played in. He plays exclusively in multinational teams with people who are totally alien culture, background. So when he then is one of the best, that means you're actually even better, by the way. Like, my boy Device isn't going out there and joining mouse sports. He's playing with Danes his whole career. Like, that, it's not that, like, they're playing it on easy mode. These guys are playing it on nightmare mode. I mean, you lived in America, mate. You know it's no joke.
Yeah, I mean, it takes, obviously, like, it's very, very personal. Some people find the adjustment easier than others. I will say that, like, just picking up on the comms and everything takes a while. Obviously, like, by now, Nico's, I'm sure fully comfortable. And, he's at least had the opportunity to live at home the entire time, give or take.
True.
But, the comms piece is pretty tough. Like, it takes, many rounds are decided on whether you get the right information out in half a second or whether it takes you 3 seconds. The other piece is that, like, that there's a pretty big difference between very specific comms. So, like, we would often name like specific angles that players hold. So you wouldn't say, like, he's in window room. You would say, like, a specific angle that somebody held, that somebody got like a kill in a highlight or something that's memorable, that's easy to remember. And, like, then the exact angle that they might be in, which allows you to pre-fire completely, peek the corner differently, etc. And, like, that's things like that are really the difference in, like, new international teams in particular. Is that when you build a team of Finnish people, like, everybody pugs together, everybody plays 10 mans together basically daily. So people have, like, roughly the same comms all around. There might be, like, a couple of very specific things that it takes some amount of time to pick up, but those are very few and very few. If you build a new team, so say like G2 in this case, like, there's going to be a bunch of new comms that people just don't have that are going to be completely different, and it's going to take longer. So you put that context around the Simple situation, where he didn't speak very good English at the time that he moved to Liquid. Completely new culture, didn't have any friends, etc. Like, that's a pretty tough place to be, and those are still, like, some of the, I mean, look, it's in some ways, like, almost like pedestrian performances compared to what he's been doing since. But, like, that's
True.
but that speaks more to what he's been doing
Yes.
since, I think, than back then. I mean, there's very few players who have ever played at that level that he played at the time. The funny thing being that there's, like, some tweet that I quote tweeted a couple of times that I put out, I think, around the E-League major, where I said something like, "Oh, it's a shame that Simple went out because he's playing, like, some of the best Counter-Strike anyone's ever played." And he replied saying, "Form's going to be better, trust me." And like, he was playing, like, yeah, it's actually been better, and it's been fully consistent. Sure. It's pretty hard to believe. I mean, it's just like it's remarkable the level of play that he's had and the consistency that he's had for that.
There's 2 points I have on the Valorant thing, and I haven't heard these points made by other people. First of all, can everyone stop this stupid shit of, like, with no evidence, just saying the salaries are all amazing in Valorant? Like, you are aware that's like some Bitcoin shit where it's like the only people that benefits are the people who want you to believe that. Guess what? The NA owners that want you to leave CSGO and go to Valorant. Here's the problem, right? If you're Dapper, someone who hadn't yet made it in CSGO, I bet you get a way higher salary in Valorant. I have also heard, maybe you could talk about this because you're obviously in a business position. I've heard, yeah, if you're like a top 5 team, some of those teams have really good salaries. But I've heard there are some big brands in Valorant that are paying like half of what, like, say, Team Liquid gets paid, for example, in CSGO right now. So some of those moves, by the way, some of them I've even heard, no joke, some of the big players that have left from CS, I've heard a couple of them, no joke, just left because they liked Valorant the game, or they didn't want to play CS anymore. Like, they didn't leave just because, oh my god, the money, and you just go into the land of milk and honey. And then the other thing is this: I have no issue whatsoever if a player just tells me, look, I genuinely don't like CS and I prefer Valorant as a game. Perfect. Time for you to go. But if you are just going for the money and the clout and the fame, like, I think you are literally like, you're doing like the opposite, like that. You're doing fucking like, one bird in the bush is worth 2 in the hand. Like, that doesn't make any sense, mate. Like, there's no long-term benefit to that. Even if you made like 2k more now, will you in a year? In CS, if you're as good, you might make even more, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the top level salaries. I think there might be some. I don't know, but I can believe that there's some exceptions who make more. So, just thinking about from like a business perspective, like if you think about a team like 100 Thieves, like their business is not to be the best competitive team. They'd like to be the best competitive team, but their business really is like being sort of like influencers, you know? So they need the big names. So that's an organization that I think, again, without actually having any insight into how much their players get paid, like I could imagine those players getting paid more than they would in Counter-Strike simply because of that. But then, like for generally speaking, I don't think the salaries are as high as in Counter-Strike, except for the couple of exceptions, like you said. And then the other piece is, you know, it's beneficial potentially to change if you're, I don't know, somebody from like Bad News Bears, you know, that kind of like a second-tier North American team who has really like no path unless you just happen to be like the breakout player. You get picked up by a Cloud9 or, you know, previously Gen G or an organization basically. Like that. Yeah. Or Liquid. Like that's your path out. But if you don't get that, there isn't really like a clear path to how you're gonna make a comfortable living playing that. So for that kind of players, if you can get picked up by like a, you know, strong organization in Valorant, like that's different. But that's not, you know, that's not you getting paid what Simple gets paid. That's you getting paid better than the alternative. And like you said, I hope for those people that like they like the game, because genuinely, I think it's really hard to play a game for a long time if you don't like doing it. I think generally speaking, you'll probably do better over the long term doing things that you actually want to do.
I'd love, maybe I should even do this. Obviously, it's right up my. How can I actually have the balls to be like, someone should do a historical article where they go and look this up? It's like, Thorin, that's your job. But okay, maybe I'll do it then. Maybe I'll make myself do it. What I would love to do is go to every like brand new big esport, and all I'll chart is something like, right, here are the names who are consistently top 10 in the first year. Let's just see how long before there's none of them left in that top 10. Because you know what? Let's do it with CSGO. So in the first years, you had like Very Games and Nip, and you had the beginnings of some of the players, like Glaive was around and stuff. Like, mate, I think it was only something like 2 years before there would have been like, you know, maybe there would be like 3 players who were top 10 at the beginning of the game. Like, even if the top end doesn't hold, God forbid if you're like the 30th best Valorant player right now, like, mate, you might not last 6 months. Like, you haven't got a hope in hell. And then let's not even forget, I think the maddest thing that CSGO players don't think about is, you know what we mourn that Valve don't change the game enough? Mate, Riot.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's job safety.
That helps.
For you.
Yeah, Riot.
For you.
I've seen in League of Legends, dude, this really happened. Some friends of mine were the best in their region at a specific role, and they like changed the role so that like it wasn't a carry role for like half a split, and then they were like the 5th best, and they just couldn't win. It's like, well, he wasn't doing anything wrong. They just changed the game. It's like saying to the fucking Federer before he plays tennis, like, just use a badminton bat instead. Like, what? I was practicing with the other one.
You give Golden State a 4-point line, before a playoff series. It's tough. I mean, it's in some ways like there's 2 sides to it. Like I understand from a game publisher's point of view, like that creates more engagement, generates more played hours. People come in for that. Like that's their business, but it can be in direct conflict with the esports side of things. And like, I remember, I think we've talked about this probably years and years ago now, but something that I advocated for early on in those like, you know, infamous conversations with Valve when CSGO was being developed was that you actually can have a different casual mode. Doesn't have to be the same that people play for a living.
Yes.
It does not have to be the same. If you need something dumb to exist in the game so that the casual players will come in and some of them will transfer over to the more competitive side, great, do it. Do it in the casual side. Doesn't have to be one for one the same. Unfortunately, Valve disagrees, and I think that's what led to some of the sort of more fundamental changes that I think has made Counter-Strike less entertaining and less interesting to watch.
The thing I've always found so bizarre, because basically no game dev ever tried it. Like, I even had a similar concept. I actually presented for League of Legends. I thought people were going to listen, but they didn't give a fuck. Where I said what you should do is, because the problem League of Legends as a game has is, at the top level, you can't be as mechanically skilled in terms of being as expressive as like StarCraft, like CSGO, because as a game that was almost inherent, it's supposed to be a casual game. They just made an esports, it got so huge. So I even told them, the answer's obvious, you idiots. Since you already have tiers in your competitive matchmaking system, you make it that each tier unlocks like extra abilities and stuff, like as in like, then it'd be insanely mechanical. Now, it wouldn't matter that the guy at the bottom can't do it. He would never want everyone to be able to fucking style on him and wreck him. He wants to play a game that's fairly simple, and it would even be like a learning curve, like, wow, I've unlocked this next level, now I get to learn like, advanced movement and dodging, or like whatever it might be. Now, the reason why I think that the logic that goes against it, again, never tested in history, goes, well, fans just want to play what they see the pros playing. Right, that doesn't apply to a single sport in this fucking world. Like, I come from England, mate, the country that invented, I'll say soccer just to tilt every European, because the problem is now this is what a cunt I am, lurppis. I used to hate American football, but now that I like it, I have to call it soccer, because like, I call the other one football, fuck off. I just do. I don't like soccer. So here we go. This is the problem I have.
It's the correct opinion, by the way.
So I grew up playing, obviously, soccer, right? I played maybe a few games from my school where I played 11 aside on a pitch with proper boots and stuff. 99% of the soccer I ever played was 5 aside, where it's on an indoor court where you play with trainers and, just normal shorts on. And basically, you 5 aside and you don't even sort of play like a serious game. Anyone who wants to take a shot takes a shot. You dribble around people. You don't care what the score is. Like, that was fun. Now, have you noticed what I just explained there? I explained we were playing a shitter version of soccer that had none of the things that we watch on television. But for us, it was fun. I tell you what, mate, if every Sunday I'd had to go and get my studs on and fucking go to a pitch and play 90 minutes, and like, I would never do it. That's not fun. I tell you what, if you're not really good, that's garbage. It's also, by the way, I don't know if people know this, but actually soccer low-key is actually underrated in this context. You know how hard it is with a football boot on wet grass to kick a fucking ball and have it go exactly where you want it? It's not like just your foot, mate. Like, that's a totally alien like object to hit it with. It's nothing like hitting it with a trainer on or something,
Yeah, I mean, look, I've played I have not played many games of 5-on-5 basketball. I've played a lot of games with 21. That's like a good example of something that's just way more accessible and easy to get to. The other thing is I love watching football. That is American football. I have no interest in playing American football.
Of course not.
I have no interest in just being killed by Gronk, for example, or anybody else of like relatively similar size, no matter what. Like, that's just not interesting to me. Like, maybe like, I'm not going to play it because I never played it as a kid, but like, you could play like flag football. That could be interesting. Yes. But no part in me wants to take part in just getting destroyed physically by a much larger human being. Just not interested in that.
I'll avoid the obvious joke that, some would say with the defensive roles nowadays, they're all playing flag. The old ones are the best, mate. We all know those. Like, because I can't lie, by the way. I know this is like a mad tangent, but I'll go into it very briefly. Like, doesn't the thing that disappoints you, because I know you like your stats, you like to follow them, because one of the best things about stats is obviously it can give you a very, very quick compare and contrast. They have ruined the history of all these fucking main sports. As I made this tweet the other day, the irony of ironies, right? Of all the big sports I got into, hockey was one of the ones that I was like the slowest to get into, in as much as like, I remember I don't come from a hockey culture. I've never played hockey on a fucking ice rink. And it's also a sport that like the eye test doesn't pop off initially. Like, in fact, when you watch the game, like if I told you like 10 years ago, Sidney Crosby is the best player, you could watch a whole game, he'd never score a point and he'd just have a bunch of shots on goal and that's it. Like, hockey can happen. Like, it's not like when Ronaldo in soccer could just score like 2 goals every game and win the fucking game like simple style. Like, it doesn't have that a factor. So as a result, it took me way longer to get into it. But I have to say, I've now come back to the position it is the best sport, and here's why. Because when I watch the NFL, I've watched a lot of the historical games as well. Mate, the middle of the field is just wide open. Like, you essentially can't just have those monsters who just murder the fucking like running back who comes in. Like, that doesn't exist anymore, and hence that's why all these quarterbacks run now. By the way, you do know back in the day, if you were like Brett Favre, they would just be sacking you like a motherfucker all day long if you don't throw the ball in like 2.1 seconds. Like, now you can't even do that. It's a roughing the passer foul. Then the other one is, in basketball, I mean, you should know this more than anything, it wasn't even just due to that. Here's the problem. Because they couldn't ever have foreseen that you could scale up three-pointers, they already had made defense non-existent because they wanted scoring to go up. So now they don't realize that is steroids on steroids on steroids right there, mate, because now the scoring has gotten too ridiculous. So even though it is fun to watch the best player score, I actually find like the back and forth, like there aren't wars like there used to be in playoff games where it's like, right, now no one's going to score for the like last 2 minutes of the game. It's super, like that doesn't really happen. Like people, it's more like, can I outshoot you? And so the problem is I've come to the final conclusion, hockey is the best sport because it's the only two-way sport left, mate. It's the one where if you're the best defensive player, maybe you can shut that guy down. It can happen.
I do appreciate the two-way argument. However, as I've told you previously, I turned against, and this is, I started skating when I was like 2 years old. I played hockey for a number of years. Absolutely love hockey. Grew up in Finland. It's obvious. Hockey got killed for me the year LA Kings won the cup. The year that they snuck into the playoffs with the 8th seed, and then they played the most boring hockey anyone's ever played since since the Devils. And their
goalie basically just didn't let anyone score. Yeah, like Brodeur style.
Quick just won the cup for them, and that like completely ruined the.
Fair enough.
Just completely ruined it for me, just because of the randomness. It's just so random. The fact that's very compelling about basketball is over the long run, the shooting numbers normalize, and eventually
the sample size is great.
Eventually, like the Lakers Clippers series will, over 7 games, it'll be decided by LeBron and AD and Paul George and Kawhi.
Yes.
And that's what I want to watch. That's that's the issue with hockey is in some of these, a lot of the time you might win just because your fourth line is better, your third line is better, and that's like, it's a really fun sport to watch. It's super fast. It's really entertaining. You can always put a game on and just kind of get stuck watching. But it just feels random. Like you look at the number of numbers of some of the best players. Just think like Crosby and Ovechkin, for example, for the past, I guess not the last couple of years, but leading up to the early to mid 2000s or mid 2000s, late 2000s. Like the run some of those players have been on, just because you can only, you're an offensive player in hockey, you play 25 minutes a game. That's like the tops. There's only so much of an impact you can have on the game. You contrast that with LeBron playing 45, 46 minutes in like all of those Golden State finals. It's just a different level of impact on the game.
It's definitely the sport where a ring has the least fucking correlation with actually being the best player. Like, I don't know why people still believe that's the case. Like, you would think the fact that Gretzky never won a single cup after leaving the Oilers might just make that point for you. And the fact that the Oilers won without him. Like, if those two details don't, that should disturb me a little bit if I believe rings are the best. Like, come on, boys. So then the other angle is this. I will say this as well. You actually also nailed why I got sour on hockey, which is my favourite hockey is it's like basketball. It's like 80s and 90s hockey. Like, that was the golden era. Like, the players are great. The game's still open. You can still do everything. It was 2000s hockey that ruined hockey for me. And you can guess why. You already named them, the motherfucking New Jersey Devils. I don't want to watch people getting their heads smashed in and then this fucker with enormous pads on and everyone just like being like a human shield for him, just never letting it go. Like, listen, here's the thing. If my boy fucking Patrick Waugh, if he saves every shot, that's sick. If Patrick Brodeur just stands in front of it, like, listen, I'm not hating him. He's obviously very good, but like, it's not enjoyable to watch. It's not aesthetically good, is it? It's garbage. And also, like, I don't want to see these 1-0 games where the fuckers just all go behind the puck. Like, how dare you? I'm paying for this game. Like, if I, like, like the classic, like, American dad who doesn't have that much money, but, he's a blue collar guy. Dude, I would just, like, throw my beer can through the TV if I was watching that game. Like, it's just garbage, isn't it? This video was kindly supported by Lager15, Pronogo, Andrew, Animosity, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Jensen Goh, Hades, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, Dean Tanglis, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to ask some sort of a topic or suggest the guest for some upcoming content I have? Do you want to know something in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers, see who the next guests are for my content? Or maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy audio discussions with me? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Illuminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.